There are certain faces that become so familiar they feel like family. People who show up in your kitchen every morning through the television screen, who teach you that a delicious meal doesn't have to take all day, and who do it all with a smile so genuine it feels impossible to fake. Rachael Ray was that person for millions of Americans. For more than 2 decades, she was the cheerful, raspy-voiced woman who made cooking feel accessible, fun, and completely doable for ordinary people with ordinary lives and ordinary budgets. But somewhere between the sizzling pans and the 30-minute meals and the daytime talk show laughs, life was throwing Rachael Ray curveballs that the cameras never fully captured. Behind that boundless energy and that trademark grin was a woman quietly navigating loss, controversy, health struggles, public humiliation, and personal tragedy on a scale that most people would never suspect just from watching her on screen. And recently, after a string of social media moments that left fans genuinely worried, Rachael made a rare and somewhat surprising return to television. People tuned in expecting the same bubbly, unstoppable Rachael they had always known. What they saw gave them pause. So before you see her now, take a deep breath. Because the full story of Rachael Ray's journey is far more complicated, far more painful, and far more human than the highlight reel ever let on. To understand where Rachael Ray is today, you have to understand where she came from and just how unlikely her rise to the top actually was. She didn't go to culinary school. She didn't train under a famous chef. She didn't have a famous last name or a powerful Hollywood connection pulling strings behind the scenes. What she had was a family steeped in food culture, an infectious personality, and an idea so simple it was almost radical: teach busy people how to cook a real dinner in 30 minutes or less. Rachael Domenica Ray was born on August 25, 1968, in Glens Falls, New York. She grew up in a family where food wasn't just sustenance, it was identity. Her mother managed restaurants, her grandfather was a passionate home cook in the Italian tradition, and her earliest memories were wrapped in the smells of garlic and olive oil and Sunday gravy. Food wasn't something the Ray family consumed. It was something they lived and breathed. That upbringing gave Rachael an intuitive relationship with cooking that no classroom could manufacture. Her professional path began not on television but behind a candy counter and then at a gourmet food market in the Albany area, where she noticed something that would change her life. Customers kept buying expensive ingredients but admitting, almost sheepishly, that they had no idea how to actually cook with them. They were intimidated. They were time-starved. They wanted to eat well but didn't believe they could. Rachael started offering informal cooking demonstrations, and the response was immediate. People didn't just learn, they were energized. They left feeling like cooking was something they could actually do. Those demonstrations led to a local television segment. That segment led to a cookbook deal in 2000. And that cookbook caught the attention of the Food Network, which offered her a show in 2001. By 2002, 30-minute meals had premiered, and Rachael Ray was officially on her way. The show ran successfully until 2019, and during that time it spawned spin-offs, specials, and a devoted audience that grew with every season. Programs like $40 a Day expanded her reach, and by 2005 she had launched her own magazine. By 2006, she had a syndicated daytime talk show that would run all the way until 2023. Along the way she published more than 20 cookbooks, built cookware lines, launched pet food brands, and created a charity called Yum-O that focused on teaching children and families about food and cooking. From the outside, it looked effortless. From the inside, it was anything but. One of the first things anyone notices about Rachael Ray is her voice. That distinctive, gravelly rasp became as much a part of her brand as her catchphrases and her smile. It's warm and recognizable and immediately tells you that Rachael is in the room. But that voice has never been purely aesthetic. Behind it was a genuine medical history that most of her fans never knew about. As a child, Rachael suffered repeatedly from croup, a respiratory infection that inflames the airway and can cause lasting damage to the vocal cords. She has spoken openly about the fact that her vocal cords were never particularly strong to begin with, and a childhood marked by repeated respiratory illness only compounded that vulnerability. The rasp that millions came to find charming was actually the audible evidence of a body that had been fighting hard since childhood. As her television career intensified and the demands on her voice multiplied, the strain became medically significant. She worked with a voice specialist to develop exercises designed to protect her throat and was advised to reduce her caffeine intake, which is notable for someone whose brand was closely associated with coffee culture. Then in 2008, the situation required surgical intervention. Rachael underwent an operation to remove a cyst that had developed on one of her vocal cords. After the procedure, she was placed on complete vocal rest for a week before returning to work. For someone who made her living talking, that silence must have felt both frightening and surreal. She recovered and returned to her screens without missing much of a beat, but the surgery was a reminder that the body keeping up with Rachael Ray's relentless schedule was always under pressure. When Rachael moved to New York City in 1995, she was stepping into a city that was still in the middle of a painful transition. The crime reforms of 1994 had begun to take effect, but the streets of New York were still genuinely dangerous in ways that younger generations might find hard to imagine today. Rachael would learn that lesson in the most traumatic way possible. Within 2 years of arriving in the city, she was attacked not once but twice, both incidents occurring within a single week. The first happened in the lobby of her own apartment building in Queens. A young man followed her inside, slammed her face against the door, pressed a gun into her back, and demanded her bag. Rachael, acting on pure instinct, reached for a canister of mace her father had given her when she moved to the city. She spun around and started screaming. The attacker ran. Most people, after surviving something like that, would have spent the next several days barely leaving their apartment. Rachael barely had time to recover before the same attacker returned. Less than a week later, he assaulted her again, this time beating her in an alley near her building. 2 violent attacks in 1 week, both by the same person, in what was supposed to be her home neighborhood. She had had enough. She packed up and moved to upstate New York, and she said later, with the kind of dry clarity that only lived experience produces, that the decision was not a difficult one. Getting mugged twice in a week has a way of simplifying your choices. It was a traumatic chapter in her life that she carried quietly, rarely bringing it up in the breezy context of cooking shows and talk show banter. But it shaped her. It was part of the experience underneath the smile. By 2009, Rachael Ray was one of the most recognizable faces in American food media. She had survived long enough in the public eye to attract the inevitable backlash that comes with widespread popularity. But even by the standards of celebrity criticism, what happened around her Dunkin' Donuts partnership was particularly striking. The endorsement deal made logical sense on its surface. Rachael's entire brand was built around accessible, everyday food that fit into real people's real lives. Grabbing a coffee and a donut on a busy morning was very much in that spirit. But when the advertisements went public, they ignited a firestorm that came from an unexpected direction. Anthony Bourdain, the charismatic and often incendiary chef and television personality, publicly unloaded on Rachael over the partnership. His criticisms were sharp and personal, characterizing her in deeply unflattering terms and suggesting that by promoting fast food culture, she was doing genuine harm. He was not alone in his criticism. A chorus of culinary purists and food culture commentators piled on, and the situation became even more bizarre when some viewers claimed that a scarf Rachael wore in one of the advertisements resembled a symbol associated with political extremism. The claim was baseless, but it spread quickly and added a layer of ugliness to an already heated situation. Rachael didn't retreat. She explained publicly that Dunkin' had approached her with a genuine interest in making their menu healthier, that the company supported her charity Yum-O, and that she had a personal connection to the brand stretching back to childhood. She declined to apologize and declined to express regret. "I don't regret a thing," she said. "Not for a minute." It was a small but telling moment. Rachael Ray, standing her ground in the face of criticism from people who carried significantly more culinary prestige than she did, and doing so without flinching. If the Dunkin' controversy was unfair in some respects, there was another episode of public attack directed at Rachael that was so completely disconnected from reality it would almost be funny if the anger behind it hadn't been so genuine and so frightening. In 2016, during the peak of the Jay-Z and Beyoncé speculation that followed the release of the visual album Lemonade, the internet became a hunt for a mysterious figure fans believed was referenced in Beyoncé's lyrics. A theory emerged pointing to fashion designer Rachael Ray, who had posted something on Instagram that many Beyoncé fans interpreted as a coded message. The Beehive, Beyoncé's notoriously passionate fan base, mobilized with remarkable speed and intensity. The problem was that a significant number of people confused Rachael Ray the fashion designer with Rachael Ray the television cook. The names are similar. The rest is completely different. Rachael Ray had no connection whatsoever to any of the people or events being discussed. She was a television personality who made pasta and talked about her dogs. And yet she was suddenly being bombarded with furious messages from strangers on social media, with people declaring they would never watch her show again, accusing her of being a homewrecker, and directing language at her that ranged from unkind to genuinely threatening. It was an absurd situation made genuinely painful by the fact that there was nothing Rachael could do to make it stop except wait for the internet to correct itself. Eventually, it did. But the experience was a vivid illustration of how social media mobs operate. Fast, loud, and frequently aimed at the wrong target entirely. Rachael married John Cusimano in 2005. He was a musician, actor, and lawyer, and over the years he became a recognizable figure to her audience through his frequent appearances on her talk show. Their dynamic on camera always seemed warm and genuine. But off camera, their marriage became a recurring target for tabloid speculation. The rumors centered not on Rachael but on her husband, with various reports over the years alleging that Cusimano had been unfaithful. None of these claims were ever substantiated with credible evidence. They were the product of tabloid speculation and anonymous sourcing, the kind of story that gets repeated often enough that some people begin to treat repetition as proof. Rachael consistently and calmly rejected the narrative. In a 2007 interview, she stated plainly that she had always known where her husband was, that she trusted him completely, and that the stories being told simply did not match the reality of her marriage. The rumors resurfaced with renewed energy in 2013 when tabloids claimed Cusimano had been a regular at a New York City swingers club. The couple responded through their publicist with a firm and direct denial, calling the report fabricated. But denials rarely travel as fast or as far as accusations. The stories continued to circulate in certain corners of the internet, another example of how public figures can find themselves perpetually defending the most intimate details of their private lives against claims that have no verifiable foundation. In November 2013, Rachael experienced a family tragedy that quickly became tabloid fodder. Her aunt, Geraldine, died after accidentally locking herself outside in freezing temperatures while house-sitting at a property in upstate New York. It was a heartbreaking and completely unexpected loss, the kind that leaves families in shock. What followed made a painful situation worse. Rachael and her husband were unable to attend the funeral because of work commitments, and her cousin Gina chose to air that grievance publicly, criticizing Rachael's absence in the media and framing it as evidence of indifference or a lack of family loyalty. Tabloids amplified the accusation eagerly. Suddenly, a private family tragedy became a public relations story with Rachael as the villain. Navigating grief while simultaneously managing public criticism about how you are grieving is an experience that strips away any sense of control or dignity. Rachael handled it quietly, without extensive public defense or counterattack. But the episode was a reminder that fame does not create a barrier against pain. In many ways, it removes the very privacy that might otherwise allow pain to be processed on one's own terms. When Rachael Ray's pet food line, Nutrish, became the subject of a major class action lawsuit in 2018, the legal claims focused on allegations that the product contained trace amounts of glyphosate, a chemical found in some herbicides, and that the branding as natural was therefore misleading. The case was eventually dismissed in 2019 for insufficient evidence. But the dismissal came after the damage had already been done, at least to Rachael's reputation in the court of public opinion. Even though the brand was manufactured by Ainsworth Pet Nutrition and had been acquired by the J.M. Smucker Company, and even though Rachael had no operational role in the production process, the public's criticism landed primarily on her. The company actually responsible for making the product received a fraction of the scrutiny she did. It is one of the peculiar burdens of attaching a celebrity name to a product. When things go right, the association amplifies success. When things go wrong, the human face of the brand becomes the target regardless of where the actual fault lies. Rachael absorbed the criticism, the lawsuit ran its course, and eventually the noise faded. But it was another entry in a long ledger of controversy that found her not entirely because of anything she had done. 2020 and 2021 were years that tested virtually everyone, but for Rachael they brought a series of personal catastrophes that would have broken many people entirely. In August of 2020, while she was living at her beloved home in Lake Luzerne in upstate New York, a home she had designed herself nearly 2 decades earlier, a fire broke out and destroyed it. She received a warning from a neighbor after the roof caught fire, but there was nothing to be done. The home burned to the ground. The loss was devastating on multiple levels. It wasn't just a property. It was a place Rachael had poured herself into, a physical expression of who she was and what she had built. The fact that she had designed it herself made the destruction feel uniquely personal. She later described going back to work almost immediately after the fire, operating in borrowed clothing, pushing herself forward because stopping didn't feel like an option. Then, just when she and her husband were beginning to stabilize, Hurricane Ida arrived in September of 2021 and flooded their New York City apartment so severely that it became uninhabitable. Rachael described the aftermath in visceral terms: ceiling speakers ruined, the fireplace destroyed, the entire space feeling as though it had simply melted. The couple had only recently finished renovating that apartment. Within days of the storm, they were starting over again. And while workers were attempting to restore the apartment, an accident broke a main water pipe, sending water cascading down from the 6th floor to the 1st, flooding units throughout the building. For Rachael, who had already lost one home to fire and was now watching another dissolve in water damage, the accumulation of loss must have felt almost incomprehensible. In May of 2020, in the middle of all of this, she had also said goodbye to her beloved dog Isabur, a pit bull she had adored for years. Isabur died in her arms. Rachael later said she felt both grateful and guilty. Grateful that the pandemic slowdown had allowed her to spend Isabur's final months close by, and guilty knowing that so many others were losing loved ones or facing illness entirely alone. About a month later, she and her husband adopted a new dog, Bella Boo Blue, honoring the one they had lost while choosing, once again, to move forward. Throughout her career, Rachael Ray was subjected to a particular brand of intrusive questioning that many professional women will recognize immediately. Again and again, interviewers pressed her about her decision not to have children, often framing the question in ways that implied she was missing something essential or making a mistake. Rachael answered these questions with patience and clarity, though one imagines she would have preferred not to be asked at all. In a 2009 interview, she explained that her career demanded an enormous investment of time and energy, and that she didn't believe she could give a child what a child deserved while also maintaining the professional commitments she had made. She was direct about not feeling obligated to have children and equally direct about not feeling that she was missing out.